Thank you for joining us. Today we are going to go over a brief overview of how to install the Modern Weapon Systems Maxim 9 Trigger Kit. In the kit you will find from Modern Weapon Systems 3 springs, the package is sealed, and a sticker. 3 springs consist of a raw spring, which is the lighter spring, a red spring for people who may have issues with primers, and an extremely tiny spring for the trigger shoe. I will tell you that this tiny spring here is very expensive. If you lose it, it will cost you about $10 to get another one. So be very cautious not to lose it. During the installation of this trigger kit, you will need the following tools: a hammer. I suggest a strong dental pick with 90-degree angles. I suggest a 5/64 punch of high quality. I suggest a 3/32 punch of high quality. And I also recommend a roll pin punch of 1/8 inch and high quality. Along with that, you'll either need to have a gunsmith block, or you can be someone like me who doesn't care to use one or spend the money and continues to use a roll of tape for $2.50 from the local hardware store. And a word from our sponsor, Slip 2000. We recommend this lubricant in all of our trigger kits. Buy it here or buy directly from Slip 2000. Alright, boys and girls, since we know that more women have bought our trigger kit than men, because men don't want to wait 4 months, we're going to get down to business. Take your Maxim 9 and strip it down. Making sure no bullets in the chamber. Magazine is removed. Take your piece back here and push forward, lift up, remove your slide mechanism. Off of the firearm, like so. Set the firearm aside. We're going to work on this. Grab your 3/32 punch. Take your punch, and while you're turning this over, notice one side is flusher than the other. And flusher is not in the current dictionary for Webster, so just take my word for it. One side is flusher than the other. Now, the side that's not flusher is the one we want to drive from. We'll grab our fancy little hammer. By the way, this is my father's hammer. I stole it when I was 10 years old. That's why I still have it. Put your punch on that little pin. We're going to drive that pin out. Doesn't take much. Little push right out the bottom, and as you can see, there it is. We're going to push it through. Don't lose it. Make sure you pay attention. The side you pushed from is beveled. The other side is not. Make sure it goes in the same way it came out. First part is we're going to slide out our mechanism forward. Be very careful. There's a spring and a small plunger. I'm going to slide this forward like so. And as you can see, everything just fell out the bottom. Just go ahead and let it sit there in the bottom. Put this part aside. Take this little armature off. It only goes one way, so you don't really have to worry about how it goes. Next thing, we're going to take out our striker assembly. As you can see, we have a spring. That's the spring we're going to change. In order to do so, we put it on the side of our fancy $2.50 tape roll, and we're going to push downward. When we do so, we're going to be able to lift up and remove these little plastic inserts. Very similar to a Glock setup. One thing you'll notice about this setup that's different from a Glock is, in the assembly here, you don't have a liner. So it's very important that you lubricate this entire assembly when sticking it back together to ensure that you have good primer strikes on every fire. Now, we've removed this spring. Don't need it anymore. Grab the new one. It's a little bit softer. Take your firing pin assembly. Make sure you keep this foot on top of your roll of tape. Slide your new firing pin over your striker assembly. Push it down and drop in your keys. Once you've reinstalled it, it should look like this. And as you'll notice, when you push it down, it's a lot softer. Much, much softer. Now, next thing's next. We're going to put this back in. Now you will grab your Slip 2000 EWL 30 heavy duty lubricant and apply liberally to the spring, striker assembly, inside the cup. Slide back into the bolt. Next, we will take our components that we dropped and put these back in. Do note that these parts only go in one direction, as you can see. Spring must go in the top of the seat, and then this little tiny circular plate has to go in on top. Push it down and hold it. Take your piece here, slide it on with the flat side inward, as you can see. Carefully slide it back. Now we're going to go ahead and put that back on here as we slide it into place. And we've got it all the way to the back. Now we will put our cross pin in. When you do put your cross pin in, be aware that the bolt can push forward because there's spring resistance at the back. So you may need to slide it to the rear. Remember to put your key back in, your pin back in the right direction. Now that it's in, we can take our 3/32 punch and lightly tap it back into place. As you can see, it does get loose. I have a solution for that. If your cross pin happens to be loose, take it back out, clean it a little bit with your finger, take some Loctite of red, put it on the tip of that pin so as it goes through it will stop, and then over the next 24 hours will in fact harden slightly and cause it not to come out when shooting, like so. Like I said, don't touch it for 24 hours and that'll harden and you'll be good to go. So that is done. Set that aside now. Now that we've completed the slide portion of this presentation, we will grab the frame of the gun. We will be replacing the spring located right here below the trigger shoe. This will soften the trigger shoe in order to make sure that the gun will fire without having the safety catch the frame. To do this, we will need the small spring, and we will need this fancy ass punch here. It's an 1/8 inch roll pin. I use Grace punches. They seem to last and not bend. There are a lot of different options out there, but stay away from the Chinese crap. Place that roll pin punch here on the frame to remove the lower frame. And yes, you don't have to remove the frame to install this component, but for this video, we'll make it so that the generic people out there who are maybe not gunsmiths can do it with ease. If we try to do this spring the other way, too many people will lose it. So we'll start this way and take the lower frame off of the firearm. Set the frame aside. Now, as you can see, it's much easier to get to that area, hence why I'm doing it that way. Now we'll take our 5/64 punch, lightly pushing through on here while holding back, and we can push that pin right through without even using a punch and a hammer. The pin will fall below here, perfectly fine. Make sure you have a way to capture your pins, otherwise you won't be getting new pins from me. Once you do that, we'll tilt the gun upside down like so, and we'll take out the shoe. And if you noticed, our little tiny spring just popped out. We don't need that one either. Now we will grab our new little tiny spring and we will place that into the back of the trigger assembly. We will make sure that we put our shoe back down correctly, and if you look, the back of the shoe has a capturing point. This is where I like to use my angle pick here to allow me to help push it into place or to capture it if in fact it falls, and set it back in. Once back in place, we can then retain our pin and we can carefully push it back through. We'll take a hammer and lightly tap it in. It goes right into place, and now our shoe is back in place and should be able to move with ease back and forth. Alright guys, almost done. One more thing. We need to get our Slip 2000 EWL30. And we need to lubricate some components here. My recommendation is run lubricant here on that arm. Pull forward here, drop a drop here. All of these surfaces, for whatever reason, are very dry within the firearm. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me why, because if the drier it is, the more friction we have. The more friction we have, the more weight we have. We also want to put it on both sides of this sliding mechanism here so we get nice slippery surfaces. You'll notice a big difference in the grit of the trigger if you do those things, and it's kind of good to let it sit overnight. Also, we're going to put a little here and soak in. The reason I use the 30 weight is it seems to retain its surface area better wherever you stick it rather than running all over the place and out of the gun. Just move the trigger back and forth a bunch of times, making sure it's worked in. Turn it this way, do the same thing. And when you're all said and done, it's time to put her all back together. So in turn, we're going to do that now. So we will lift up and remove our pin for the frame. Do keep in mind that our red spring is not used unless we have light primer strikes. To be clear, if you do not lubricate your gun, as I've mentioned, you may exhibit light primer strikes with the raw spring, even though you wouldn't normally have them for any other reason. So we're going to grab our frame. We're going to reinstall that into the gun like so. We're going to put our roll pin in here. We'll start it with a bare hammer. We want to make sure it goes through the frame. When about halfway through, we want to grab our 1/8 roll pin punch to ensure we don't damage the pin, driving it all the way through. We are flush. Pin is flush there. Pin is flush there. We're good. Now, for the final part of the assembly, we grab our slide. Take our firearm in our hand. This has to go on at an angle. Pay attention. Make sure our armature is flipped up. Push forward while pushing on the back face. Drop our piece. We're good to go. And oh my goodness, Mike Stock's going to be happy because I just installed his trigger kit. Thank you for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed our instructional video, and you'll see us again. For Modern Weapon Systems, we appreciate your business and your patronage. Take care.